So this is our fourth Real Business of Wine webcast. We're delighted to have Philip Cox live from Romania. And Philip is we use the word unique in the wine industry quite a lot, but the idea of someone going from the UK, from I think Bristol on the west coast, the west part of the UK, to Romania, about 18, that's heading for 20 years ago, to start a wine business there and creating what is one of the biggest biggest wineries actually in Romania, and the biggest exporter of wine, I believe, in Romania, and one of the biggest exporters actually of Pinot Grigio in the world, I believe, is rather an extraordinary story. So what I'd love to do is go through some of that. I know we've got a number of people in the audience, including Felicity Carter, who interviewed you, Philip, for Minding His Wine Business International. We've got certainly Richard Siddle of The Buyer, and you wrote a letter to them, to Richard recently, describing what's going on at the moment. We have a number of other people. So I'd love to kick off with, would you like to give us the background for those people who haven't read the story of how Philip Cox got to be where you are today? Just share a little bit of that now, please.
Short story. Well, I've been here since the early 1990s. I came initially to work for Heineken in the beer industry for a very short while. We were importing Heineken beer in Romania. How I started that is another story. And back then it was pretty chaotic. It was just after the revolution. So I think I came in 1991. So that's what, 28, I can't count, a long time, nearly 30 years. Mm-hmm. And it was crazy here then. There was no food in the shops. It's pretty much like now, actually. There was fighting, there was counter-revolutions, army in the streets, also like now. And there were no foreign products, so we were doing beer for a while. It was very successful, but we also had hyperinflation, so it was very hard to change the Romanian money into foreign currency to pay for the beer. So I thought the idea of exporting something to be able to get foreign currency. And I knew a little bit about wine. My cousins have wine shops down in Bristol, where I'm from. Two of my cousins had wine shops. And I'd done the WSET course back in the 1980s because I liked it, and I'd worked in their shops. So I thought, how hard can exporting wine be?
So was this, were you still wearing your Heineken? Were you still sort of sitting in the Heineken offices? Was this under the aegis of Heineken?
No, we were I formed an independent importer. It was my first job. I was 23. I was managing director. It was my first job. Since then, it's all been downhill.
So, I mean, I was there. I was in Romania in those early days, and I remember I visited Moldova, and we ended up flying out through Bucharest, and I remember it was these were very hard times. I mean, getting water from wells. It's obviously progressed a long time because that was before the EU. That must have helped a lot. And you were there during those years.
I've seen the whole thing, and I've seen the wine industry here transform itself completely from it. Back at the time, it was very hard to do anything. All the equipment was terrible. Everything was state-run. And then we had that whole transformation while it was privatized, which was bumpy and difficult and took a long time. But we got through it, and I started off exporting wine through some German company.
How long ago? What year was that?
1994. I started working with Ray Kinderman, the guys that make Black Tower.
And did you use one of the old state-owned, the formerly state-owned wineries?
Yeah. We worked at Rekash Winery, which I now own. It was the first one, and a couple of the others around the country down by the Black Sea. So we started off sending bulk wine to these Germans to be bottled in Germany and sold on. I think our first customer was Quick Save, if you can remember that.
Yeah, there were discount stores in the UK before the days of Lidl and Aldi. And so
Thresher.
And tell me, back in those days, I mean, the vineyards, as I recall, were in a pretty rough state during the Soviet era. And of course, then they had to be given back to the original, or not necessarily original owners, but sort of in some way. How did that work in terms of you? I mean, how did you end up taking over or using the Rekash winery, and how are you getting your grapes? Who was growing them? How was that all handled?
So when I was working for Ray Kinderman, I was buying grapes from all of these state-owned companies and vinifying them in essentially rented wineries. So Rekash was one of the wineries that we were renting. And then they started privatizing that and giving it back to people, and it was messy. There were many disputes about who owned the land before 1948, who it belonged to, families where like uncles and cousins were all fighting for the land. And it took basically all the 1990s to sort that out. And it wasn't really until 2000 that the privatization actually started to happen. So our company started in 1998, my own company. I left the Germans in 1999. We bought this vineyard from the government in a sort of lend-lease deal. First of all, we bought the winery, then we bought the vineyard, and then we bought the land about 10 years later.
So, and again, my memory of the wineries in the Soviet era, that weird thing of all the tanks went horizontally. There were these, everywhere else in the world, tanks went up, and these were like all torpedoes or submarines. And they are painted very often sort of in cream colored or whatever. And the other thing that was always struck me in a lot of those places was that the stainless steel wasn't stainless. So
rusty stainless
steel, which was very strange. So how did you, I mean, who was making the wine? Because from my understanding, you weren't a winemaker. Who was making the wine, and how did you go from the kind of wine? I mean, some of the wine that was being made in the old days was perfectly good, but a lot of it wasn't. How did you get over that bump in the early days?
There was huge problems. So when we bought this winery at Rekash, where I am now, we had to change everything. We basically threw away everything we bought, both the vineyard and the equipment. Everything was, like you said, stainless steel. There wasn't any stainless steel. It was glass fiber tanks. That were
you had that?
Yeah, glass fiber tanks, which were, they're okay when they're new, but when they're like 30 years old, they're not good. So we gradually changed all the tanks to stainless steel. We've always worked with a large number of like flying winemakers. So we had Australians, Kiwis, a few English ones, all kinds, Germans. And gradually we changed the equipment as much as we could. We couldn't get any money at that time. There was no bank credits. Nobody wanted to loan us money. So we had to do it very quickly and sell as much wine as we could to get the money to do everything. And you're right, joining the EU helped a lot. So from 2007 we joined. We were able to get some EU money for vineyards at least. We haven't had much for the winery, but they helped us replant a lot of the vineyards, because a lot of the quality problems in the past were due to bad vineyards, more than the equipment.
You also had other things. I think one of the other things that I remember was the dry goods were a problem. I mean, you had really bad corks, for example. I mean, I think that was an issue, wasn't it?
That's still true. I don't want to be nasty to the Portuguese, but everybody sends their rubbish corks to Romania, even now.
Don't worry. I made one in France, and we struggle with corks as well, but I'm sure you don't get the best. I also think that barrels, historically, when people have tried to buy barrels for countries like Romania, you haven't always been sent the best barrels, the driest wood either sometimes.
With corks, we gave up about 20 years ago. We basically only use screw caps now for the export markets and for the local market, diams and stuff.
So how many bottles are you now making?
Last year we made 25 million, which is pretty good from a standing start. We didn't have any when we started. The winery was only selling grapes and bulk wine.
And you're buying in those grapes. How much land do you have?
We have 1,250 hectares this year planted.
All planted.
All planted.
And so how much are you buying and how much are you using of your own grapes?
It's about 60% of what we use is bought in, and we have a heap of long-term suppliers that we work with. We help them with the farming. Sometimes we finance them. And last year we helped 2 of them to build crush wineries for us. So we built 2 new wineries last year. Mm-hmm. So we paid for them. and the guys, big growers, crush grapes for us. We have our winemakers there, and they send basically juice up here to Rekash to make into wine.
What's the distance? What are the distances involved?
So one of them is down by the Black Sea, which is 1,000 kilometers from here with no motorway. And the other one is in a place called Vrancha, which is on the border with Moldavia. That's further, like 1,100 kilometers. But the roads are lacking still here. They are building some motorways, but slowly.
So that raises one of the first, because I know we've got a number of MW and WCT diploma students watching this, and a number of other people from across the world, effectively. But the first question I know is going to be interesting to a lot of them is that whole thing of denominated areas, appellations, whatever we want to call them. I'm doing some work in Moldova at the moment, and there's a lot of very happy discussion there about, hey, we're getting places, areas recognized by the OIB and so on. How important and how relevant are those regions to you in Romania today, Philip?
It depends on what market you're talking about. So inside Romania, Romania has quite a buoyant wine scene. It has a growing and healthy scene with people getting more interested in quality wines. We have 200 new wineries opened here in the last 10 years. All of them are new. All of them are trying to do exciting premium wines. So in Romania, it's more important people know the DOC areas slightly. They know the producers better, but it is important where the wine comes from. Outside of Romania, the absolute opposite. I pretty much changed the Romanian wine law so that we can do varietal wines, which are countrywide blends. And that's actually easier to sell in countries like England, Germany, our main markets, Netherlands. People there really don't know Romanian appellations, and they don't really care a certain level of price, but, which is sort of, yeah.
No, okay. So the other thing that's going to come up, and I'm sure some of the people watching are I'm going to throw the ball at them to ask some questions, but one of the other things that comes up is this kind of polarization between what are described as artisan, the far end natural wine producers, and what are known as, if you like, industrial producers. I'm producing about 3 million bottles a year, so I'm sure that the cooperatives I'm working with are definitely in the industrial camp. You're bigger by a multiple of 7 or something, or 8. So you're an industrial producer, but you're producing small volume premium wines within that, aren't you?
Yeah, I think we're the biggest seller of premium wines in Romania. We have about 1 million bottles, which are like around over 10 euros shelf price, which is what I would define it for the market here, talking about a country with no excise tax on wine. So we do a lot of premium wines, small batch wines, barrel fermented wines. We even do natural wines, orange wines, and small little fun projects like that. So I do think you can do both.
So that's I think going to be, I think it'd be interested to know if anybody actually in the audience here would like to chip in a question at that. Anyone like to raise a hand or ask a question at the moment? You've got the Q&A. Please be ready to do that. I'm going to I'm going to invite someone. I'm going to invite Lotta Garitz to talk here. Lotta, are you there? There you are. You're muted at the moment. We can unmute you because I think you've worked with the Wine Lover Group, and I think you know quite a lot of the people who are great fans of the natural wine fraternity. Do you think that many of them would imagine an industrial producer making natural wine? Lotta, can I hear you? I can't hear you. Okay, but Philip, why don't you answer the question? I'll see whether they...
Well, I think with natural wines, the important thing is 2 things: is the grapes. So you have to be good grapes and they have to be grown organically. There's not a fixed rule about what they are, but my understanding of it is that they have to be made from organic grapes.
Yeah.
So we have that. We work with 2 or 3 different producers around the country that do organic grapes. We don't certify the wines as organic because we change the producers sometimes, because we are doing quite big volumes of orange wines especially. We need to have like a constant supply of them. So if one of them has a bad year, we buy grapes from 2 or 3 different ones. So we can't actually call them organic wines, but they are all from organic grapes. The other thing is you don't add anything to it in the winery. So it doesn't really matter how big the winery is. I think if you respect the principles.
So why are you fermenting with wild yeast?
Yeah, it's all wild yeast. There's nothing added, no sulfur in the winery, no yeast, no enzymes, no bentonite, no filtration. It's made in small tanks. It's on a small scale project by our standards. So we make it in like 5,000 liter tanks, quite small tanks.
So the only thing that it would not necessarily tick a box is that the grapes might not be certified as organic.
They're from certified organic producers. We can't certify the wine as organic because to get a certification from the wine, it has to be one producer of grapes and one winery.
Okay.
They don't let you have grapes from 2, 3 different people.
Okay, but technically, I guess if you had a smaller batch, that wouldn't be a problem. Technically,
we could do it. Yeah, we could certify organically 1 year from one place, 1 year from another place, maybe. But because we do orange wine, it's not really important to call it organic. It's more important to call it orange wine.
Who buys those wines?
They are growing spectacularly. It's one of our fastest growing products. So the big one is Japan. They're crazy about it in Japan. It's growing very, very fast. It's even sold in supermarkets in Japan. In England, we sell it in Asda, but we also sell it in, we did sell it in Mitchell and Butler's pubs before they all got closed this week. Germany, we have it in Penny Market, I think. No, Rewe. Penny Market and Rewe. And Holland, Aldi.
That's interesting. I'm going to pass the microphone actually across to Lotte, who we lost earlier because she had a problem, but I'm now going to see whether she can do that. I don't know if you're there. You are, Lotte. Are you there?
Okay. Can you hear me?
Hi, Lotte. I can hear you.
Okay, perfect.
Where are you, Lotte?
I'm actually at home.
No, where is home?
Home is basically everywhere, but I'm actually living right now in Germany. Grew up here, but I was born in Romania as well, so have some roots in Hungary as well to make it a little bit complicated. Yeah, in terms of your question, Robert, my feeling with natural wine is it's like kind of a weird trend with which rather belongs to a tiny group of people. I don't know how you see it, Philip, in terms of like producing like higher volumes of natural or orange wine. You said you're selling it in Rewe. How do you see the response of the general consumer?
It's, I think supermarkets in Europe do it as a kind of PR stunt. I don't think it's really the right place to sell orange and natural wines in supermarkets. I think it's not the customer profile for it. We do much better selling it in the on-trade, so restaurants, specialized wine bars, and, natural wine bars. And then in Japan, it also sells in supermarkets because they are just crazy about orange wine. It's a big thing in Japan. But here in Europe, it doesn't really sell fast enough in supermarkets to make it like a major product for them. That supermarkets all want very fast turnover and very spectacular. And orange wine's not like that. It's still a niche product. So I see it doing well in the on-trade restaurants when they can open again. And,
can I just, the one question that seems interesting to me here is that you, from my understanding of your business, and I'd love to know more about this, most of what you do is private label for the supermarkets we've just been talking about. Is that correct? The volume in terms of what you do?
If you talk about our exports,
Yeah.
actually a lot of them are our own labels. We try and avoid doing the supermarkets labels as much as we can. So we like to develop joint labels with them that sort of belong to us or jointly.
But there are a lot of, I mean, you do have a lot of labels.
We do have a lot of labels. All supermarkets want a different label, and most of them are quite cool about who it belongs to. They don't necessarily want it to belong to them.
But how many different labels might you have at any given time, for example?
Normally around 250. Yeah, it changes. We turn them over quite often.
Okay, so that where I'm coming from is obviously, again, back to our, if you like, not just the natural wine world, but the more the fine wine world, the more artisan. And what we're used to seeing is the name of the producer, the name of a domain, something that you can actually drill down to that has been going for a certain period of time, and so on. And certainly if you're trying to sell your orange wine into restaurants, I would imagine the sommeliers are looking for that kind of thing. Or am I wrong?
I think with orange wine...
I mean, orange wine is just an example, but at the finer end of what you're doing.
Well, I think that's what most wineries do. I don't think it's the right thing. What we do is we try very hard to develop packaging which is specific for each market and each country and each channel. So for example, in your country, in England, we have a range of labels which are for the independent wine merchants. So there are one set of labels directed at pubs and small wine bars and local, like Tanners over in Shrewsbury, or Jascots we have in London there, Corny and Barrow, people like that. So they all
very, very smart. I mean, Corny and Barrow is one of the smartest merchants in the UK. So you're covering a wide range there.
Yeah, we try and sell to as many people as we can, and they're very good. They're great people, and they're very clever, and they know what they're doing. So we develop labels. Actually, they develop their own label, which is suited to their customers. And then the same is true everywhere. So like in Germany, we have some very clever labels that are in German, and they're funny for Germans, and they're aimed at a certain level of German consumer. We work very hard with the supermarkets there to design the wine for what they want. And that works. It doesn't matter who makes it. The people that drink it don't care. And
Can I come back to that again? I think some of this stuff, I'm looking for some questions here, and some are beginning to come through, but that idea of designing a wine, that's something, again, that something that I understand in terms of what I do, but I think that a lot of people imagine that you should be making the wine from the traditional grapes and the traditional vineyard. The idea of creating the wine for the consumer is something that I think is still shocking for some people. How much are you doing that? Do you find that a supermarket is coming to you with a specification and saying, we want something that's like this? Or are you going to them and saying, hey, here's something we've just been trying? How does it work?
Well, I do get into trouble for saying things like that. I don't want people to think it's like we're not genetically modifying it or doing something dangerous or chemical. The main thing we do is make good wines. So we have a great team of 6 really professional winemakers, mainly from Australia, New Zealand, Italy. So the main thing is having a good basic quality of wine. If you have a good basic wine, from that, you can tweak it for different markets. We're not talking about doing major. So I mean, for example, in Germany, they might want to mess around a little bit with the sugar level. For supermarkets, they might want it to be a little bit sweeter. They're very attentive to the gas levels in Germany. They want more CO2 than the English. The English don't want their wine to taste fizzy. The Germans like it a little bit fizzy. So they're not huge changes to the wine.
I've got a question from Felicity Carter, whom you know, Philip.
I do know. Hi, Felicity.
Philip, I can't see her, but she's there. Felicity, go ahead. Felicity?
Can't hear her either.
I'm going to ask a question until she says something. I can't see. She's definitely there. What she's saying is it's been suggested that you use a spinning cone for your natural wines. Is that true? And if so, is that a violation of the natural ethos?
No, don't use a spinning cone. Spinning cone is a thing to take alcohol out.
Yeah. So do you use a spinning cone for other things?
We only use it for one thing, which is making 0 alcohol wines, which is a new project we're working on now. We're making a zero alcohol wine.
But otherwise, you're not using it for anything else. You don't need it.
It's not wine. It's a zero alcohol wine-based
product. And actually, I've got somebody who, again, I don't know if you know him, but Philip Quick, who I know, who is a Brit based in Moldova, in Chisinau. And Philip's got a question about your labels. If I can actually, Philip, are you there? Do you want to ask this question?
Hi,
Philip.
What's up, man?
Good to hear from you.
Good to hear you, Philip. Long time. I never actually met you in the flesh, Philip.
Well, the way things are going, you probably won't.
You're a bit of a living legend out here in Eastern Europe, Philip.
Am I?
Anyway, Philip, I just wanted to know a couple of things. You're talking about natural wine. Now, I know, as I remember, when you started off your business, you one of the reasons you were very, very successful, I personally believe, was that you were using some of the winemakers from Yellowtail. And I think they probably were the reasons you hit the quality mark right from the beginning with your business. And then you just exploded. So it's kind of interesting to know who's making your wine naturally now. Are you using the same guys or I mean, because Australians are not associated normally with making natural wine, Philip. So I'll be interested to know who's helping you out with that.
That's true.
And second question, when you, for example, you export wine to Russia, would you use a Russian wine label designer? Because as far as I know, in Moldova, you've got to have someone who really understands the Russians to design a Russian wine label. Because I wouldn't necessarily ask a Brit to design a Russian wine label for me.
Thanks, Philip.
No, good questions. So the first one is definitely true. We've had a lot of winemakers that have worked at Yellowtail. We still do. We have, I think, 4 last year. So Hartley Smithers, which is our main winemaker, our head winemaker, he's worked with us for 16 years, and he also works in the winter down for John Casella there. And his wife, Nora, she's Spanish. She's from Navarra, and she also worked there, and they actually got married while they were working for us, and we have a couple of others. And yes, that helps. We prefer Australian winemakers or Australian or New World trained winemakers because they do make a professional job, a very consistent job. They make wine using science rather than tradition. And that's important because we need, at all kinds of wines, we need to have a consistent and a high quality product. And that goes for natural wines too. They've it's not the thing that they would do if you left them to their own devices. They don't really believe that making wine the natural way is the best. It's getting the best out of those grapes, but they've taken to it very well, and they've read up on it and documented and gone through all the research and found a way of doing it that makes a wine that they're happy with. So it's made naturally, but we obviously want it to be defect free. So we're not of the school of thought that says that it's okay to have Brettanomyces or volatile acidity. We want our natural wines to be interesting, but not off the scale weird, not defective.
I've got a comment from Felicity here, by the way, which involves at least one word in capitals. She says Australians do make natural wines, and in fact, that's something I'm certainly aware of. There's a growing number of very keen small natural wine producers there. What is interesting, though, is you talked about some of your producers being organic. How easy would it be? I know the conditions in Moldova, and I think they're similar to quite a lot of what you have in Romania, to go sustainable, or indeed to go fully organic. How doable would that be for you and moving into the future?
I think it's difficult in this part of the world. Even for the growers that we work with, it's very risky. They basically, in years when it rains a lot, they lose a huge amount of their grapes. It's if it's too rainy in a country, it's really difficult to do functional organic winemaking. And I think you need to go somewhere drier, like Spain or Australia, to do it.
How about a sustainable program which does reduce the use of input?
What I was going to say is that the whole thing, because of our natural wines that we're making, because we've been getting more involved in it, we've definitely tried to make our whole process much more sustainable. So you can do things, for example, like using spray machines, which recover a lot of the spray chemical. That they have a thing like a vacuum on one side, which pulls a lot of the spray back into them. And you use only 20% of the chemicals and the diesel for pulling the chemicals around the vineyard. So you can do more green work, more pruning, more weed control using mechanical means. You can do a lot of things in a sort of conventional vineyard, but to use less damaging chemicals. And I also don't personally particularly agree that the chemicals they use in organic farming are much better for the environment. I mean, they're naturally occurring chemicals like copper sulfate, sulfur dioxide, but they're not necessarily nice chemicals either. If you've ever been sprayed with sulfur dioxide, it's ugly. The copper sulfate gets stuck in the soil forever. It's poisonous. You know, it's a finely balanced thing.
You're making orange wine. Are you also experimenting with zero sulfur?
Our orange wine has no added sulfur. We don't add any in the winery.
Right.
It has some from the vineyards, from the fermentation a little bit. It comes in at like under 40 milligrams per liter total sulfur, but it's naturally occurring. It's not put in the winery.
But would you?
I was going to say that experience making the orange wine has changed our winemaking style overall a little bit. So like we've been working on adding and using less things in our wine generally. So all our wines now are vegan. We don't use any animal products in them. Most of our red wines don't have anything except sulfur in them. We've cut down on all of the other winemaking tools that a lot of wineries still use, like casein, tannins,
Gamma Arabic, those sort of things.
Arabic. We've stopped using all of that. Even egg whites, we don't use egg whites anymore.
What about sugar in terms of, you said the Germans or some countries want a little bit more residual sugar. Would you still use grape sugar for that?
Use grape concentrate, yes.
Yeah. So that's one of the few additives, one of the few things you would do in terms of intervening.
Yeah. But we can make it ourselves. We have a concentrating machine. Right. So I don't really see that as a chemical. That's part of its juice. Yeah.
So within your winery at the moment, you're making your natural and your small your small volume wines within the same winery?
Yeah, but we have different sections of it. We have some rooms which have a lot of small tanks where we can do more of the experiments. And then we have big, huge ones outside.
The question that I've been holding off on, but it's obviously an elephant in the room, and it's one that I know a lot of people are interested in. In terms of what you're producing with your own 1,200 hectares of vines and the grapes you're buying, how much is what we could call international grapes, which I'd now include Pinot Grigio in? We could say it's Italian, but is now, I guess, an international grape. How much is Merlot, Chardonnay, Cabernet, Pinot Grigio, and how much are the grapes that people think of as being autochthonous or indigenous to Romania?
I think we have a little bit over half of our plantation is with local varieties. So principally the three Fetescas, Fetesca Negra, Fetesca Regala, and Fetesca Alba. And we've planted quite a lot of one called Negru de Dragașan, which we think is a promising, quite new varietal from here, Tamoiasa. But then where we sell that depends a lot on the market. So obviously the Romanian market is very patriotic, and our biggest selling white wine here is Fetesca Regala.
Which is a lovely fresh white style. Yeah.
A zippy, apricot-y. And that also does sell in other countries, but it's a struggle to get people to import it still. It's hard work. I know a lot of people advise wineries here that selling local varieties is the, you know, the kind of cure for everything, but it is really difficult. We've only convinced a few, for example, in England, a few people to put local varieties into big scale distribution. It does work. We have a couple in Asda that sell pretty well. A couple of Fitescas, a white one and a red one. We've had them in Aldi, but it's slowly improving. But it takes a lot of work to build up a completely unknown variety on the world market. It's a long-term struggle. Not saying it's not worth doing, though.
Well, one of the things I've seen happen in other places, I mean, Turkey does it, and I've seen it happen back in the day in Sicily and so on, has been blends of the international grapes and the local grapes as a way of putting a word on the label that consumers feel familiar with. Is that something you find works?
Yeah, we've tried that. We've had several blends. We've done them in the UK with Aldi UK. We've done a few in Holland, but it's a slow thing. I don't want to sound negativist. The most successful wine we have with Fitesca in it doesn't mention it on the label at all. We have one on the German market in Rewe and Penny Market, and it's a more premium wine, but it sells because of how the wine tastes and the label design, not because of the name of the variety. People that don't know it find it frightening, I think.
And what's the blend of that wine?
It's Fidesca Negra with a little bit of Cabernet Merlot. It's called Richtig Fett.
So again, it is that blend of flavors they're used to and flavors they're not used to. Is that now another aside before I forget it is you've got a very big high volume winery. Is what's happening with wine tourism for you?
I mean, generally or this week?
I'm going to take the moment, obviously, out of the equation. Just generally, if we were having this conversation 2 or 3 months ago, or hopefully in 2 or 3 months' time.
If you asked me in last year, I would have said it was going quite well. We had 30,000 tourists last year. So we're quite lucky that we're near a big city, which has conferences and, you know, company get-togethers. So we have a lot of sort of corporate tourism, big groups of tourists dropping in, and it's been going well. And we have like a whole food and wine matching program for them. And we're building a new visitor center where we've kind of put it on a bit hold for now because we had to close it last week, obviously due to the current situation. But it will get going again towards next year, and it's a big help. The winery shops do a great business, and anything which is direct to customers is very good for us. We have 130 of our own wine shops here in Romania. It's a kind of franchise system. So we help independent businesses to make a Rekash wine shop. We supply them with marketing materials, shelving, you know, shop fittings, air conditioning and stuff. And they put our branding on it and sell our wine.
So that's a way of going direct to consumer, obviously. But are you going to direct consumer through online? Is that a model you can do in Romania?
There are quite a lot of online wine businesses here, and we work with them. I don't think it's really worthwhile having our own when there's a lot of other people doing it already, which is quite successfully. But maybe one day, the ones that we do work with are going well. In other countries, we work with them too. We work with Virgin Wines over in England. And I think we have one in Germany, but I can't remember what it's called. I think we're just starting.
There's a question Philip Quick asked, which I'll ask on his behalf in a sense, but it was a question that's very, it certainly was on my list early on. What he's written is that a lot of European companies are starting to look at buying Moldovan Pinot Grigio, and he loves Pinot Grigio generally. In the UK, we see Pinot Grigio coming in from German bottlers. We see it coming in from various places, and I Heart Wines, for example, you never know where your Pinot Grigio is going to come from in an iHeart. How much Pinot Grigio are you doing and selling?
I think we made last year about 5 million bottles.
And that was sold everywhere, or?
That's sold everywhere. Historically, a lot of it has been going to England, but more recently, it's really taking off in Netherlands too, and now Germany. We start selling it in Aldi Sud. So that's going very well. and I think Germany will overtake England in the next year or so. It has overtaken England already.
And when those customers are buying that Pinot Grigio, do you think they know it's Romanian, or do they mind that it's, where they're interested is Romanian?
No, I think people at a certain price point don't really pay much attention. The varietal is the key information for them and how the label looks. So that's what the iHeart brand has worked off very successfully. And we worked with them for many, many years, and it's gone very well. And I think if they identify from the label that the wine is a good quality and the brand is able to keep supplying a good quality, then people will keep buying it. I don't necessarily agree that they do a good job when they keep chopping and changing it.
Well, that to me it seems to me rather like in the fashion business, where I'm buying my T-shirts from Bangladesh this year and from Vietnam next year or wherever. Is that not a risk for you? That, I mean, Philip was just asking about Moldovan Pinot Grigio, talking about Moldovan Pinot Grigio becoming popular. Isn't there a risk that you're always competing with the next country that can offer a similar product for the same price, or ideally a lower price for them?
That's true, but we take a sort of proactive approach to it. So we're always trying to sell our wine in new places. We're always trying to sell it with labels and brands which belong to us. So if we can find a brand or a concept that works in a different country, we have, even in the last year, we will stop selling it in one country and start selling more of it in another country. So it works both ways. They can chop and change who they buy the wine from, but if you have enough customers, you can change where you sell it too.
And are you seeing new styles coming through? So, for example, I don't think of Romania historically as being a place for sparkling wine that we see globally. For example, we don't see Romanian rosé as being a strong player internationally. Are you seeing those sort of styles beginning to grow?
I think at the moment, rosé is massive over here in Romania. It's gone from nothing to about 30% of the market in the last 2-3 years. We make about more than 5 million bottles of rosé, which we didn't 2 or 3 years ago. So it's growing massively. Outside of Romania, we have a lot of rosé from Pinot Grigio. Pinot Grigio, sort of blush rosé, is really growing everywhere. So we sell a lot of it in Holland, in the supermarkets in Holland. We have it now in Spar in the UK, the Independents in the UK, and we're just going to start doing it in Penny Market in Germany. So rosé styles, I think blends, red blends and white blends involving local varieties is something we're working on a lot to try and push to people. And then, of course, more and more different natural products. So we started off doing orange wine, but this year we've introduced the red natural wine, which is again from organic grapes. The same thing, just with red wine. But we're going to do a rosé one, which is natural too. And then we're looking at this business with the low alcohol too, which I think is it's a trend. It's a growing demand from customers. It's not necessarily what I would drink, but people seem to need it.
And across your range of wines, do you now see, I mean, if I walked into your winery now, or your range of your 250 labels and so on, are they going to be the wines that say, look, we are, if you like, proudly Romanian, and we are flying the Romanian flag and going to help build the Romanian industry? And the others that are, as you said, actually serving the retailer's need for a Pinot Grigio or a Pinot Noir, which is one of your other success stories. How do those two sides of your business really, in terms of numbers, how do they match up?
I think, it's not just the retailers, it's what regular consumers want to buy. And it's very diverse. It differs in different countries. So like Pinot Noir and Pinot Grigio are big products for the UK, but in Germany it's completely different. We sell Sauvignon Blanc is our biggest selling product in Germany, and Cabernet Sauvignon. So it's different in every country. In Russia, it's Muscat. In America, also Muscat and Chardonnay. It's different in every country. From my point of view, they're all promoting Romanian wine by being there on the shelf. People eventually do realize that they're Romanian. It might not be the initial reason they buy them. I don't think they're looking for Romanian wine yet. But I think by having our wine on this shelf and selling tens of millions of bottles of them, we are promoting Romanian wine, and we're starting in all the customers that we serve to see that they're prepared to take a little bit step up and then buy a more premium wine. So we can start with something like a Pinot Grigio to get the business going, to get us into a relationship with them, which is very important. And then we can say, let's try a blend of some local variety. And we've done that quite successfully in a lot of countries. It's very hard to get people's attention. You can't just go and sell them something completely left of field. You know, it's not the first thing they will buy.
We're sort of heading to a quarter of an hour roughly to go. Any questions from the panelists? I've got something from Rachel. Would you like to, she's actually going to leave us and said, thank you for doing it. But I've got a question from Felicity. Would you like to answer that? I'm going to see if I can pass you the microphone, Felicity, if you don't mind, see if your microphone's working. Actually, I can't see you for a second. There you go. Felicity, you should be there. Can we hear you?
She's written me one. I can see what she's written.
No, but I see what she can actually say it. Felicity, can we hear you? Is your microphone working? I'll say it if it can't.
She's
wait
shy.
1 second. 1, 2, 3. Okay, from Felicity. Another question. Earlier you said you'd had a hand in changing the wine law so you could do cross-regional blending. Is this going to be a problem for the Romanian wine industry in the future when people want to focus more on appellation wines, in the sense that widespread cross-regional blending can undermine the perception of the appellation system?
She's thinking like an Australian, which is difficult for her not to do. I don't think one thing affects the other. There was a lot of debate about it when we changed the law. I mean, it's a European law. It's the same in all of Europe. People can make cross-regional blends for about 10 years now. Romania was probably the last country to adopt it. So I think there are dozens, hundreds actually, of small wineries, as well as ourselves with our premium wines, that are focusing on, you know, individual regions, even single vineyards, specialist products, super high-end wines. I don't see the two things are contradictory at all either. You can have, to use an Australian example, you can have like, what's it called, treasury wine estates, whatever they have in the supermarket wine, and then you can have Penfolds Grange. One thing doesn't exclude the other, I don't think.
I've got a question from Eleni Bluchu, who's I think in Greece, which is very relevant to that question. Eleni, do you want to ask that question?
Yeah, my question is, what is the price range of your wines? I mean, what is the lowest price we can find on the shelf, and what is the highest? And if I want to make it a little bit more complicated, what is the percentage of each price of exports or selling in the domestic market?
Okay,
thank you, Eleni.
Good question. Thank you, Eleni. So right now we're about 55% local market and 45% exports. And the price ranges differs a lot, obviously, depending on countries which have duty, like the UK, excise tax. So in a country with no tax, like Germany or Romania, our cheapest wines are probably around €3 per bottle shelf price. And our most expensive wine that we do, the premium wines, go up to about €40 per bottle. That's in countries with no tax.
So what would a €40, one of your €40 wines, what would that be? What would I get for €40 retail?
Our top wines are a few. We do like Amarones. We use an Amarone technique on Cabernet, Francesca Negra, and Syrah. It's called Cuvée Oberland, so it's made with dried grapes. And it's a very big, beefy red wine made from a very special vineyard. So, you know, barrel aged and barrel fermented and everything, barrel aged. So very small batches, like 5,000 bottles from the very best vineyards. You have to remember in Romania, most of the vineyards, going back to your question about the privatization, most of the vineyards have been replanted since 2007 in our case. Actually, we started in 2001, but the bulk of what we planted has been in the last, 15, 20 years ago. So the vineyards are the really key to making these high-end wines. You need to have great vineyards, great places, but also a bit of time. They don't make their best wines straight away. It takes 10, 20, probably even more years. So I think we're only getting to the beginning of doing really exciting high-end Romanian wines, not just in our winery, everywhere.
In terms of the high-end wines, are you reliant on critics and scores and so on? Or how do you actually, how do people find their way to those wines?
In Romania, they take quite seriously some of the big international competitions. Rather oddly, the Brussels one and the Felicities competition, actually the Mundus Vini, is quite well regarded here. Decanter is quite well regarded. The IWC, not so much.
Interesting.
I think it's just because there have been more Romanian wines winning in Decanter and in Brussels. So people are used to seeing it more often. So those kind of things help. But for selling the high-end wines, there's a huge amount of tastings, little wine shows, group tastings. We have 40 guys here out on the road. We have 2 sommeliers. So it's a very intensive, expensive effort to get people to try the wines, to be able to build up premium wine business here.
I've got another question from Lotte, but I'm going to, just before we do that, how collegiate, you said there's 250 new Romanian wineries, I think you said in recent times. How many Romanian wineries are there in total now? Serious, I mean, commercial wineries.
I think there's about 250, 260. So nearly all of them are new.
Okay, and how much do you, I mean, we had a few years ago, we had one of the big old ones. There was a bit of a scandal and it was closed, as I recall, and you had some other sort of stories. How much do you work together, and how ready are some of the very small wineries to work with somebody of your size?
It's one area where we're not very good. The Moldavians, Philip will know that the Moldavians are much better at promoting their country together. We struggle here in Romania because in Romania there are 4 or 5 really big wineries that basically do most of the supermarket business where all the big volumes are. And then there are 200 odd small wineries, like 20, 30 hectares. The small wineries don't really want to be collaborating with us big wineries. They find it a bit distasteful, I think.
Do they work together amongst themselves?
There are 2 or 3 small groupings that promote Romanian wines. There's one called Premium Wines of Romania. I've tried very hard to do groupings of them. We do press trips. We have 5 or 6 wineries that I get on well with, that we organize press trips. We bring journalists here. We've had the Masters of Wine here. We've had the Circle of Wine Writers. We've had Jancis Robinson and people like that. So we do work together, but it's not enough, and it's too fragmented. It's very hard to get them all to agree what is a good place to concentrate on. So if I say I want to do a push to sell more Romanian wine in England, everybody laughs at me now and just said, well, England doesn't want to be in Europe, don't want our wine. If I say I want to do it in Germany, everybody says, well, Germany only want to buy very cheap wine. If I say do it in America, it's too far away. Some of them want to try China. It's difficult to get them interested in doing an effort in one country. The Moldavians are very lucky because they're pushing to sell their wine in Romania, and they're doing a great job at it. Actually, Moldavian wineries, I think, are more of a competition on the local market than Romanian wineries.
Lotte, you've got that question. We'd like to ask, can I if we hear you ask your question that you posted. Are you there?
Yeah. So basically, in just a few weeks' time, if it still is the case, I was asked actually to talk about Romania and its wines, and I was looking around and I was wondering where there would be like a really good source for it, because I mean, the Germans are quite accurate in taking all the numbers and the statistics for their country. I'm not so sure about Romania, so I thought maybe you could give an advice.
It's a big problem getting accurate statistics about Romania. There's an organization called APEV, APEV, which is the Exporters Association. So they have quite a lot of statistics on their website, and it's fairly accurate. It's not always completely up to date. So there's another one you can try called Premium Wines of Romania. They have a website that has quite a lot of information about how much is planted. And I think the Ministry of Agriculture has some pages in English, which does give some information, which is quite accurate actually, but it's a bit mixed up. They talk about exports in tons, for example, not in liters. And
so we're very near the end. If anybody's got a question, now is your chance to chip in. But before, while we're just waiting for any last questions, please do take advantage of that. Philip, you've been doing this, we've just worked it out, sort of nearly 20 years. And obviously some of the things under your own brand has been sort of effectively, so roughly 20, right?
More than 20. We
Okay.
started in 1999, this company.
Okay, there you go. So 21. And some of the things we're talking about now, I think, are quite recent. I think the orange wine project, for example, is recent. Obviously, the low alcohol, no alcohol thing is very. Can you look forward, taking ourselves out of the awful situation we're in at the moment, but let's look forward 5 or 10 years. You're still young, and your business is relatively young in the wine world. Where do you see your business, Rekash, and where do you see Romanian wine over that 5 to 10 year period coming towards us? And that includes climate change, and how adaptive do you see Romania and your winery to that?
Our business doubled in the last 4 years, so I think we will maybe not grow quite that fast in the next 5 years, but we probably grow quite significantly. We're trying to do it in a sustainable way, so our program with the natural wines is not a coincidence. So I think that's a big direction, not necessarily natural wines per se, but more sustainable wines, being able to prove that you produce them in a environmentally friendly way. So we've just changed our car fleet to electric cars, for example, here, using solar power, recycling our water. We just put in a big water recycling plant to use a lot of the wastewater and then reuse that for the vineyards. So then getting that out to the public, we want to work a lot more with the on-trade and the regional merchants in all countries. So we're trying to look at businesses which are more sustainable. So like our more exciting wine merchants, like Corny & Barrow and Tanners and people like that in the UK. I can't think of the ones in other countries. Kataoka in Japan. So closer relationships. We're trying to go more directly to working with our final customers. So in a lot of countries now, we're working directly with supermarkets, directly with wine merchants, not so much through importers as we used to do, because that way we can have a better communications with them. We can tell them what we want to be selling. They can tell us what they want more directly. So I think that's a direction, cutting out middlemen and then more direct to consumer products everywhere. I think that will be big. Other things that can happen, smaller packaging, special packaging, that's taking off half bottles, lower alcohol products. I think Romania also will grow. I think now that there are so many new wineries, and overall quality of wine has gotten a lot better here. They will start to find customers around the world, so it will grow.
And in terms of all those new wineries, are you finding, and again, back to the beginning of this conversation, early part, we were talking about you having a lot of still Australian winemakers. do you see a new generation of Romanian winemakers who are going to take over from those imports?
We're always trying to train people. And there is a generation of young Romanian winemakers around in the country. They're not very suited to what we do at the moment because most of them only have experience of working in very tiny wineries. Our winery is on a completely different dimension to nearly all the others. So I would very much like to have more Romanian winemakers, and we are trying to send them off for training. We have some Moldavian winemakers starting for us this year, and we're going to try and train them up and develop them. They suffer here from the education system. It's not very good. The wine university, that there isn't a wine university. There's a horticulture course, which has a bit about winemaking. So it's not, to be in a big winery, you need to have the science and the, real proper training, like a 3-4 year university course, because it's about consistent products, and it's very important to have everything under control. If you mess up 100,000 liter tank of wine, that's a lot of money. So, but we were trying to train Romanian winemakers, and I think the ones that are out there at other wineries, they are learning all the time. And I think it will be quite exciting in 3 or 4 years' time, especially with the vineyards developing and getting older and improving in quality. So I think it will be in a very different place if this virus doesn't kill us all.
Philip, I don't have another question from the audience, I don't think.
I have a question.
Holly.
Okay.
Oh.
I've let everybody else ask their questions. I'm curious how you are handling communication for so many brands in an era when our consumers want to feel like they have direct contact with you as the winery and the winemaker.
It is complicated. It's obviously we do a lot more of it on social media, so we don't have huge advertising budgets, and we don't spend a lot of money on press and everything. So we have a great team in London. Rachel, she was on here earlier, Rachel and Clemence. They run our social media accounts, so especially Instagram is becoming very important, Twitter, Facebook. And I try and talk to people. Anyone that looks on Twitter, if people are asking about our wines, I try and find them. I get into a lot of arguments about orange wine on Twitter. Everybody has a go at me about them. But I think that's one way we can kind of stay in touch and let people understand it's a real company. It's not a corporation. We're not like a multi-trillion-dollar bank or something. We're real people. We have real farmers. So it's good to talk to people directly, and social media is very good for doing that. So we can talk to people directly. We really spend more time promoting the winery than we do the actual brands. I think the brands, if the wine is good, then the price is reasonable. They kind of take care of themselves in the wine industry. We're not quite like the gin industry or the beer industry. We still have a slightly different way of working, I think, for wine brands. We don't have as much money as the gin industry. It costs us a lot more to make the wine than it does to make a bottle of gin.
Or indeed beer, from your background at Heineken.
Or indeed beer.
You know that, so.
Yeah.
Any other questions before we wrap up? No?
I'm going to chime in before we close with
Polly.
one more thing. Okay, so I read where you were quoted as saying it takes, I'm going to paraphrase, it takes a lot more skill to consistently produce great volume wines than it does one-off. And when I originally did my wine studies, I did them under Tim Hanai, who that was the very first thing that he said in class, is that before we are quick to judge industrial or large-scale producers, we need to understand that the skill set involved in consistently producing these wines, it takes years to learn that. And since then, I have been in many cases judged for being an advocate of market-driven wines and consumer-driven wines. So I was very quiet in this because, like many of the attendees, I really sat here rapt listening to what you had to say. I think there are a lot of lessons that small and growing wineries can take away, especially in a time when we need greater resilience and diversity and systems and growth. So thank you very much.
Actually, we have a late question from Lotta again, just at the last breath of this. Lotta, go ahead.
Yeah, it just popped up in my mind because I know the situation in Hungary, and they obviously have issues with clones and the research they're doing, and with the climate change that is quite a recent topic these days as well. Ferment, for instance, does not do a proper job. They have a lot of issues which cost them a lot of money. How is it in Romania with availability of clones and comparing also native varieties and the international ones?
We have the same problem. We struggle a lot with Fitesca Negra. There are not enough official clones of it. But we've been working with some big nurseries in Italy, oddly enough. They've been doing a good job of developing some good clones of Fitesca Negra and Negro de Dragășan, which are way, way, way better than the original ones. They've been cleaning them up and improving them. And we're starting to see some really exciting results now. The newest plantations we have of Negro de Dragășan are making really good wine. So it's a slow process. They have to work on it in the vineyard, in the nurseries. It's a lot of scientific research, but oddly enough, the Italians are doing it for us because they're like the world's biggest seller of vine materials. It's getting better. The research here in Romania is not strong. But because there are a lot of people wanting to plant these varieties here in Romania, the nursery growers are researching it, and they are really improving them. I'm very excited about the latest Fitesca Regalas we have too. They're getting a lot better than they were even 10 years ago. More consistent, more aromatic.
Well, thank you. We're kind of 8 minutes over, and I think probably is time to but thank you, Philip. Thank you very much. I hope a lot of people, and remember, this is not just a live webcast. This is going to be on YouTube within the next, hopefully, 48 hours, with roughly. I'm hoping that a lot of people will rethink some of the attitudes they had, which is where I started early on in this conversation, between the industrial, the private label, the supply and supermarket world, and a lot of people who imagine that is a totally separate place from the natural, the organic, the sustainable, and so on. And I'd love what you've been saying this evening to get a number of people to go away and think again and have another thought about actually what the consumer really wants to buy and how that is going to evolve over the future. So I'd like to say thank you very much on all our behalf. Thank you to the audience for being here. If you're around, the Joe's Bar, which we have been running on other evenings, it's not open tonight, but it's going to be open tomorrow night after Jancis Robinson is going to be sitting in not exactly the same chair as Philip, but she's going to be in North London. But thank you all again, and thank you, Philip, for giving us your time and being.
Thank you, everybody.
And being so frank. That's what I really appreciate, you being so frank and so open about what you do. So thank you, and good luck. Good luck to everybody in these tricky times. Thank you.
Yeah.
Bye.
Be healthy. Stay healthy. Take care.
Cheers.